just being close to home. The feelings of youth, the moments of truth, the feeling of just being close to home. So take me home, yeah.
Tate, I'm Coming Home, a new song from Joey Newcomb from his new album, Big Avoidus. How's everybody doing? Side of the darkness. Tate is how you say dad in Yiddish. Have you heard the shofar today? Let's blow the shofar. I've been opening the show blowing this shofar of mine, a ram's horn. Tonight I think I'll blow this little one. It's a little smaller. And it was a gift from the Biala Rebbe. You should all merit to meet him someday. A little bit higher pitched. Who is with us on a Wednesday evening? Pauline in Chicagoland, Sharon in New Jersey, Yehud in South Carolina, James in Indianapolis, Melissa in Great Neck, Sandy in Michigan, Shinto in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Paul in the Great Northwest, Ryan in Minneapolis, John in Maine, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Ira in South Carolina, Tom in PA, Bella in San Francisco, Hannah in New York, Jerry in El Paso, Texas, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Jerry says shalom, Marco in Melbourne. It's so great to tune in from so far away. Patrice in Utah, Alan in Maryland, Paul in Chicago, Rachel in Geneva, New York, Monica in Rio de Janeiro. We love being international. Thank you for tuning in. Karen in Northern California, Renee in Indiana. Welcome everybody. Over on the YouTube side, Aoife in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Marie in Freeport, Long Island. We have a great story tonight. A famous story from the Talmud, the love story of Rachel, and the daughter of Ben Kalba Savua, a very wealthy man, and the great sage Rabbi Akiva. We heard elsewhere in the Talmud that once Moses was shown by God, what the future of the Jewish people looked like. And in this vision, he was sort of taken to Rabbi Akiva's classroom. And Moses, the lawgiver, was sitting in the back of the classroom, invisible, right? He's just there in a vision. But listening to Rabbi Akiva teach, and Moses was like, I don't know what he's talking about. I can't understand anything he's saying. It's above my head. He's deriving such high-level, lofty concepts. What's wrong with me? And God said, it's in your merit, right? And not only did God say, but Akiva said, and we learned from Moses at Mount Sinai the following. And Moses was placated, and it makes sense, right? That somebody who establishes a tradition. Now, in some ways, obviously, the closer we are to Mount Sinai, the more authentic the transmission of the law is. Certain things got diluted in terms of their immediacy to us in the generations getting away from Mount Sinai. But in other respects, the oral tradition grew and blossomed and, reached understandings and teachings that weren't possible in earlier ages. And so that's the kind of a beauty of the tradition. At any rate, we are on page 63, Samech Gimel. Here we're in chapter 5 of Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. This tractate is about the marriage contract, and now we've been getting into the kind of nitty-gritty of the rights and obligations of the spouses within a marriage. We learned in Mishna number 5, we're completing that discussion of Mishna number 5 right now, that, and we've been discussing this for a while now, there is a conjugal obligation, right? Both spouses have an obligation to fulfill the conjugal relations obligation of their marriage. Both spouses have that obligation. Yesterday we were learning about the frequency of the obligation that a man has, which is really dependent on how available he is due to the work that he does. And apropos that discussion, we learned that the one who goes to study Torah, he might be away for a long time, and that's such a worthy endeavor. However, if he causes his wife anguish, he should really think twice about doing that. And we had the famous story yesterday about the sage that would come home, Rav Rehumi, who would come home for Yom Kippur every year. Only once a year he would come home to be with his wife to interrupt his learning. But one year he got especially distracted by the Torah learning that he was doing, and he forgot to come home for Yom Kippur. And his wife, who was, so anguished, looking forward to that all year, and show up, and she cried. And when that tear fell from her eye, he, who was learning on a rooftop somewhere, the whole roof collapsed beneath him because of the anguish that he caused his wife. Heaven decreed that he would be punished in that way and lose his life. So, don't cause your spouse anguish, fellas. Okay, so apropos this discussion, and Torah scholars, sages who were away from home for a long time, we come to the very famous story of Rabbi Akiva. We pick this up at the bottom of 62b. The Gemara further relates, Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Ben Kalba Savua, one of the wealthy residents of Jerusalem. Now, Rabbi Akiva lived as a young man when the Second Temple was still standing, and later in his life, he witnessed the fall of the temple. Tragically, he witnessed the destruction of the Second Temple. This man who would become his father-in-law, Ben Kalba Savua, was so wealthy that elsewhere in the Talmud we learn that in the siege of Jerusalem that the Romans conducted, and that resulted in the fall of Jerusalem in the year 69 of the Common Era, if there were three wealthy families, and this was one of them, and if those wealthy families had been allowed to sort of feed the residents of Jerusalem, the siege could have lasted for decades. But there were zealots within the city, Jewish zealots, who wanted to fight the Romans. And so they actually interfered with these wealthy people, providing the sustenance that the people of the city needed. They wanted to fight rather than hold out in a siege. And it obviously went terrible. The Romans breached the walls, came in, destroyed the temple, etc. But this Ben Kalba Savua was of an order of magnitude of wealth. Just think of the famous billionaires of today. That kind of wealth is what he had. So Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Ben Kalba Savua. And the daughter of Ben Kalba Savua saw that he was humble and refined. And she said to him, if I betroth myself to you, will you go to the study hall and learn Torah? So let's just pause for a second. So imagine a young lady who grows up in the house of a billionaire, right? Presumably, they can make a match for her, with the most famous young sage in the kingdom, with another incredibly wealthy family, the son of a wealthy family, etc. I mean, with that kind of wealth, they could arrange a wonderful match for her. She, on her own, because she would see him from day to day, recognized in this employee of her father, a very low-level employee, a shepherd, and as we'll learn, an illiterate shepherd, but she saw in him his essence, right? His inner character and his potential. Now, she didn't just say, I think you're all that, and let's get married. She said, I'm interested in you because of your potential, but you must realize your potential, right? So she said, if were I to betroth you, it would be on condition that you would start learning and educate yourself and become a Torah scholar. Now, she's saying this to him when he's 40 years old. He already has children from an earlier wife. I think he's a widower. He's illiterate, but there's something about him, tremendous intelligence, a kind of peace of soul, something really special that she recognizes in him. So she said to him, if I betroth myself to you, will you go to the study hall and learn Torah? He said to her, yes. She became betrothed to him privately and sent him off to study. Her father heard that his daughter had taken it upon herself to betroth herself bad enough that she'd handled her own betrothal, but to some lowly employee of his who's illiterate and, doesn't know can't even read, let alone be a Torah scholar. The father, Ben Kalbasuvah, was furious. He removed her from his house and he took a vow prohibiting her from benefiting from his property. So this billionaire heiress, now, because of her belief in Akiva, has been disowned, disinherited. She's now a poor woman like any other poor woman in Israel. So Rabbi Akiva went and he sat for 12 years in the study hall. And during these whole 12 years, when he's learning and becoming the man whose potential she recognized, she is just earning her own living, living as a poor woman, a seamstress, shepherdess, whatever she could do to get by, to support him while he's learning. He's not bringing anything into this marriage. She's just supporting him, actually, while he's learning in the study hall. And she's doing that with the work of her hands. When he came back after 12 years, right, Rabbi Akiva went and he sat for 12 years in the study hall. When he came back to his house, he brought 12,000 students with him. And as he approached, he heard an old man saying to his wife, 12,000 students, meaning his students. He had already become, in that 12 years, which is actually quite quick, like the most prominent young Torah scholar, relatively young, even though now he's, 52. He would eventually live to be 120. So for him, he's young. So he comes back with 12,000 students, his own students. He's that prominent. And as he approached his house, he heard an old man saying to his wife, now we're on 63a, for how long will you lead the wife of a widow of a living man? Right? You're married to a living man, but he's away and never comes home. It's been 12 years. You're like a widow. How long are you going to live this way? And Akiva's wife, Rachel, said to this skeptical old man, if my husband would listen to me, he would sit and study for another 12 years. When Rabbi Akiva heard this, he said, I have permission to do this. And he went back and he sat for another 12 years in the study hall. Doesn't say whether or not, he ever came home during that period. But, most of the days of the year, if not all of them, he's away from her in the study hall for another 12 years. When he came back, he brought 24,000 students with him, right? So even more. He's by far the most prominent Torah scholar in all of Israel at this point. So his wife heard that he was coming home, and she went out toward him to greet him. Her neighbors said, borrow some clothes and wear them. Meaning she had been reduced to such abject poverty. This daughter of a billionaire is now so poor that she doesn't have clothes with which to go out and greet any Torah scholar, certainly not the most prominent Torah scholar in all Israel, even though she is her husband, she is his wife, right? But people don't know that. It's all kind of private still. So her neighbors said, borrow some clothes and wear them so you can greet this great Torah scholar. She said to the neighbors, a righteous man understands the life of his beast. Proverbs 12:10. Also saying, I don't have what to change into. When she came to him, to Rabbi Akiva, she fell on her face and kissed his feet to do him honor, right? As any very humble person would do to such a great Torah scholar, such a prominent scholar. His attendants pushed her away. Like they're just keeping the rabble away from the great sage, and a lot of people want to kiss his feet, so they just pushed her away. He scolded his attendants immediately, and he said to them, "Leave her alone. As all my Torah knowledge, that which makes me this great honored sage, and your Torah knowledge," speaking of the 24,000 disciples surrounding him, "all of it is hers." Right? It's hers. It doesn't just accrue to her merit. It was caused by her. All this learning disseminated throughout Israel, all the teachings that Rabbi Akiva has transmitted to us. You know, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi arranged the Mishna, the final form of it, but most of the Mishnayos that comprise the Mishnah were composed by Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva. And Meir is Akiva's student, okay? So it's really Rabbi Akiva who composed much of the Mishnah. And all of that learning comes from her. All of us learning day after day these Gemaras, which are commentaries on the Mishnahs. So many of it, so much of this learning, the whole Talmud, really was made possible by Rachel, the wife of Akiva. And he acknowledged that and made all of them acknowledge it too. In the meantime, cut to her father, right? He disowned her 24 years ago, has had regret since then. He misses his daughter. But he's not thinking about that today. He has heard, or he is thinking about that, but because he has heard that the great Rabbi Akiva, the greatest Torah scholar in all of Israel, is coming to visit his neighborhood. And he thinks to himself, okay, this vow that I took to disown my daughter, I got to get out of it. I'll go see this Akiva. He's the greatest sage in Israel. He'll find a way to dissolve my vow so that I no longer have to, have this disconnect with my daughter, and I can, lavish love on her in material support the way I would prefer to, and haven't been permitted to do since I took this vow 24 years ago. So in the meantime, her father, Ben Kalba Savua, heard that the great man had come to town, and he said, I will go to him. Maybe he will nullify my vow, and I will be able to support my daughter again. So Ben Kalba Savua came to the sage, to Akiva, to ask about nullifying his vow. And Rabbi Akiva said to him, did you vow, thinking that this other Akiva, that your daughter fell for, that he would become a great man? And the father said to the great Rabbi Akiva, not knowing it's the same guy, the father says to him, if I had believed that he would know even one chapter or one halacha, just one law, I would not have been so harsh, right? He was infuriated because his daughter, it wasn't so terrible when you think about it. He was infuriated because his daughter attached herself to a total ignoramus who couldn't even read, right? He couldn't even read the Aleph base, the alphabet. Let alone, become the kind of Torah scholar that it would, be appropriate for this great man's daughter. He wasn't looking for a wealthy husband for his daughter. He was looking for a Torah scholar. He was just infuriated that she attached herself to an ignoramus. So now when he comes before the great Rabbi Akiva asking for his vow to be nullified, and the great Rabbi Akiva says, well, this Akiva, the shepherd that your daughter attached herself to, if you knew that he was going to, learn some of Torah and become even a great Torah scholar, would you have allowed her? And the guy says, yeah, if he was even going to learn a few laws, I would have let her. I would not have made this vow. So now we've established that this vow was a mistaken vow, and this is the grounds for nullifying it. So, where is it? Yes, if I had believed that Akiva the shepherd would know even one chapter or even one halacha, I would not have been so harsh. So Rabbi Akiva says to his father-in-law, I am he. I am the same Akiva. Ben Kalba Savua, his father-in-law, fell on his face and kissed Akiva's feet and gave him half his money. So now Akiva and Rachel, they went through this 24 years of suffering. But immediately on this day, he received $500 million. So now he would live his life not only studying Torah and being the great Rabbi Akiva, but also with tremendous means, which he didn't use to aggrandize himself. He gave so much of it to charity and established schools and yeshivas, etc. But on that day, his father-in-law gave him half his money. So the Gemara relates, Rabbi Akiva's daughter did the same thing for Ben Azai. Ben Azai would become the son-in-law of Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva's daughter did the same thing, that she allowed him to go study for many years in the yeshiva, and she, allowed herself to, permitted him to go, even though it caused her tremendous anguish. Akiva's daughter did the same for Ben Azai. And this explains the folk saying that people say the ewe follows the ewe, meaning the female sheep follows the female sheep, meaning that the daughter's actions are the same as her mother's. Tremendous compliment in this case. On the same subject, it is related, Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, was sent by his father to the study hall to learn before the great sage, Rav Yosef, right? So there was a young Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, who was sent to learn before the great Rav Yosef. And they all agreed that he should sit for 6 years in the study hall. When 3 years had passed, the eve of Yom Kippur approached, and he said, I will go and see the members of my household, meaning his wife. So his father heard, right, Rava heard that his son Rav Yosef, the junior Rav Yosef, was leaving the study hall prematurely. He had agreed to learn for 6 years, and now he wanted to go home and see his wife after 3 years. So his father heard and took a weapon, as if he were going to war, and went to meet him. According to one version, he said to him, did you remember your mistress, as you are abandoning your studies to go see a woman? And there are those who say that he said to him, did you remember your dove? Since both father and son were involved in an argument, they were preoccupied, and this master did not eat the cessation meal before Yom Kippur, and that master did not eat the cessation meal that day. It's an interesting teaching because it ends right there, and that actually concludes the commentary on Mishnah number 5. What are they actually saying there? You may have agreed to learn for 6 years, but now you want to go home and see your wife. So his father's like, you're reneging on your agreement to learn for 6 years before you go home, but this would be such a joy within his marriage, and shalom bayis is everything, right? You must always prioritize, a man must always prioritize the well-being and joy and spiritual well-being of his wife above all else. Right? Even Torah study, she may have permitted it, but he wanted to go home. His father got into an argument with him. They started, debating the halachas of this question, and they missed the final meal. Now, it's a tremendous merit to a Jew to fast on Yom Kippur, right? It's the fast that's commanded in the Torah, a full day fast, a 25-hour fast. But what's interesting is that you get the same merit for eating the final meal before the fast as you do for the fast itself. I mean, you still have to do the fast, but eating that final meal before the fast is a tremendous merit. It is a mitzvah to eat that meal, and these two guys missed that meal. What is the teaching? Maybe that argument shouldn't have happened, and maybe they shouldn't have got so distracted in their argument. He was trying to do the right thing, but then he also had to honor his father, who got into the argument with him. Anyway, they both missed that mitzvah. Okay, that's a conclusion of our commentary on Mishnah number 5. Here's Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 5. A woman who rebels against her husband is fined. Her marriage contract is reduced by 7 dinars each week. And Rabbi Yehuda says 7 half dinars each week. Until when does he reduce her marriage contract? Until the reductions are equivalent to her marriage contract. In other words, until he no longer owes her any money, at which point he divorces her without payment. What does it mean for a wife to rebel against her husband? We'll see it in the Gemara. Is this the law that if she's rebelling, we start reducing the amount of her marriage contract, and once that amount is reduced to 0, he divorces her, and there's no marriage payment, there's no penalty, there's no ketubah payment to make because it's been reduced on account of her rebellion, that her ongoing rebellion. Is that the law? No, that is not the law, as we shall see in the Gemara. Rabbi Yosef says he can always continue to deduct from the sum even beyond that which is owed to her in the marriage contract, so that if she will receive an inheritance from another source while they're still married, he can collect the extra amount from her. And similarly, if a man rebels against his wife, same idea, if a man rebels against his wife, he is fined and an extra 3 dinars a week are added to her marriage contract. And Rabbi Yehuda says 3 terapa ikin, this an amount of money. That's Mishnah number 6. Here's the Gemara. Against what does she rebel? Meaning, what do you mean when you say if she rebels against her husband? What does this mean? And Rav Huna said she rebels against engaging in marital relations. So if a wife refuses to have marital relations with her husband, this is an act of rebellion. They don't have to remain married, but he's not going to owe her the marriage payment if she refuses to have conjugal relations with him and continues to refuse. It's not much of a marriage, and it's going to be grounds for divorce, and eventually without the marriage payment, as we shall see. So Rav Huna said against marital relations. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said the nature of this rebellion is not necessarily against marital relations. It could also be against the tasks that she is obligated to perform for her husband. Now, the Gemara clarifies this dispute. The Mishna states, similarly, if a man rebels against his wife. Now, granted, according to the one who says that the rebellion is against marital relations, it is well. Either one of them could rebel against the other by refusing marital relations. However, according to the one, meaning Rabbi Yosei, according to the one who says that rebelling against her husband means she rebels against performing the tasks that she is obligated within the marriage to spin, wool into thread, to make his bed, to feed him, to nurse his children, etc. So according to the one who says that she rebels against performing tasks, is the husband subjugated to her to perform tasks? He doesn't have an obligation to perform tasks for her. And the Gemara answers, yes, he is. As the Mishnah is discussing someone who says, I will not sustain and I will not support my wife. That's the nature of his rebellion. So the Gemara asks, but didn't Rav say, one who says, I will not sustain and I will not support my wife, he must immediately divorce her and give her the payment of her marriage contract? What relevance is there to this discussion in our Mishnah of reducing the marriage settlement, the marriage payment under the ketubah by a certain amount each week until he stops rebelling? When in fact, if he refuses to support her, then after a short time, he must give her a divorce immediately. What relevance is there to this discussion of reducing the fine every week? And the Gemara answers, shouldn't he be consulted to investigate whether he will retract his decision? So in the interim, while the court discusses the issue with him and explains that he must divorce his wife, if he does not retract his decision, he is fined week by week by the addition of 3 dinars per week to her marriage contract. So the Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa with regard to a rebellious woman. It is the same to me about this rebellious woman. In other words, the same law applies if the woman who rebelled is a betrothed woman or a married woman, or even a menstruating woman, or even if she is ill, or even if she is a widow waiting for her yavam to perform levirate marriage. In all of these cases, if she says, I will not have sex with this man, even though she is minimally betrothed to him. Now, they're not supposed to have sex yet until they're fully married, but she's saying, I will never have sex with him, so that she has put herself in a status of rebellious woman. And this also applies to a menstruating woman or a widow awaiting the yavam or a woman who is ill. Now, the Gemara questions this. So granted, according to the one who says that her rebelliousness is referring to performing tasks for her husband, okay, this makes sense. However, according to the one who says that she rebels against engaging in marital relations, is a menstruating woman fit to engage in marital relations? She is tameh, right? She's in a state of ritual impurity. She has to wait till her period ends, then count 7 clean days, then go immerse in the mikvah, and then wait for nightfall, and then her husband and she are permitted to each other. So if she's in that time of the month, she's not permitted to make love with her husband. What difference does it make if she says, I will not make love to my husband? She's not permitted to anyway. And the Gemara answers, we saw this answer several times yesterday, the one who advocates that opinion that she can be a rebellious wife even if she's menstruating, he would have said to you, one who has bread in his basket is not comparable to one who does not have bread in his basket. Meaning a person who is fasting, in the middle of a fast, he's not allowed to eat anyway, but his fast will be easier for him if he knows that there's food waiting for him at the end of the fast. right? So a man who's not permitted to have sex with his wife anyway because it's that time of the month will have less anguish about it if he knows that, okay, well, once they're permitted to each other, they're going to have each other. But if she has taken this vow that she will never sleep with him again, right, then, that's where this law kicks in, that she's a rebellious woman and she's going to be penalized. So there are those who say that the objection was phrased differently. Granted, according to the one who says that the rebellion discussed in the Mishna is referring to engaging in marital relations, well, this explanation is consistent with that which was taught with regard to a woman who is ill, that she be fined as a rebellious woman, as even if she is not capable of working, she can still be rebellious with regard to marital relations. They could have relations while she's ill, though she could not be working. However, according to the one who says that her nature of her rebellion is against performing tasks, that's what Rabbi Yosef said, now we're in 63b, is an ill woman fit to perform tasks? Since she is ill, she has no obligation to perform tasks, and this is not deemed rebellious behavior. Rather, one must explain this as follows. If she rebelled against engaging in marital relations, everyone agrees that she is defined as a rebellious woman. They disagree with regard to one who rebels against performing tasks. One sage, Rav Huna, holds that one who rebels against performing tasks is not a rebellious woman. And one sage, Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, holds that one who rebels against performing tasks that she's obligated to perform within the marriage, she is considered a rebellious woman. Now, with regard to the matter itself, a woman who rebels against her husband, what do we do with her? What did the court do with her? She is fined. We reduce the marriage contract by 7 dinars each week, and eventually when the marriage contract, when she's been a rebellious wife for so long that the marriage payment has been reduced all the way to 0, let's say it was 200 dinars, a standard amount, when a young woman got married, and then she refused her husband. They reduced it 7 dinars a week. So after like 28 weeks, right, half a year, a little more, then she would have reduced her marriage payment down to nothing, and at that point he could divorce her and not have to pay her anything because of her rebellion. That's what the Mishna says. Our sages went back, and so Rabbi Yehuda says 7 terapikin, which is just a little different money amount. Our sages went back and were counted again, right? Meaning that the ruling in the Mishnah was not the final ruling. Our sages went back and they were counted again, and they said that rather than reduce her ketubah payment by a certain amount each week that she's a rebellious woman, instead, they would make announcements about her for 4 consecutive Shabbases. And they decided that the court would send messengers to her to inform her. Be aware that if your marriage contract is, even if your marriage contract is worth 10,000 dinars, you will lose all of it if you continue to be a rebellious wife. If she does not retract her rebellion, she forfeits her entire marriage contract. Now, with regard to this enactment, it is the same to me, meaning the law does not change if she's a betrothed woman or a married woman, even if she's a menstruating woman or if she is ill, and even if she is a widow awaiting her yavam. If she says, I will refuse to have sex with my husband, she's a rebellious woman, and they make announcements about her that she is a rebellious woman and warn her that if you keep acting this way, you're going to lose your whole ketubah payment. And after 4 weeks of this cycle of making the announcement, warning her, consulting with her, then she just loses the ketubah payment. Rabbi Akiva bar Yosef said to Shmuel, is a menstruating woman fit to engage in conjugal relations? And he said to him, yeah, this is like one who has bread in his basket versus one who does not, even though they cannot have sex while she's menstruating. It causes the husband anguish that she said she would never have sex with it. So Rami Bar Chama said, we make announcements about her only in synagogues and study halls, but not on the street. Rav said the language of the Baraisa is also precise as it teaches. They would make announcements on 4 consecutive Shabbases, which are days when no labor is performed and people are not to be found in the streets, but rather in synagogues and study halls. The Gemara conclude from this that this is the case. And Rami Bar Chama said the court sends people to talk with her twice, once before the announcement and once after the announcement. They don't want to humiliate her. They want this marriage to get back on track, right? Now, what she might be saying is, I want a divorce. I don't care what it costs me. I can't be married to this man anymore. I just want a divorce. And, because it's the man in the patriarchal system that has the right to divorce, she can't just say, I'm going to sue for divorce. So she undertakes this activity to, create the divorce, as it were. But it would be better if they could find a way to make peace in the home and go on as man and wife. And that's what the sages were trying to do. Rav Nachman Bar Chizda taught with regard to this, the law is in accordance with the decision of our sages. Rava said, this is an absurdity. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said to him, what is absurd about this? I said this to him, and I said it to him in the name of a great man. And who was the great man who ruled this way? It was Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina. So the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion does Rava hold? And the Gemara answers, in accordance with that which was stated. Rava said that Rav Sheshes said, the law is that she is consulted in an attempt to convince her to retract her decision, and while doing so, deductions are made from her marriage contract. But Rav Huna Bar Yehuda said that Rav Sheshes said, the law is that we do not consult with her. According to both versions of Rav Sheshes' ruling, she does not lose her marriage contract immediately, but rather it is reduced every week. This is the source of Rava's opinion. And actually, they don't reduce it. They just warn her that she's going to lose the whole thing. They warn her 4 times. Before and after each warning, they send someone to have a talk with her and try to save the marriage. But if she persists in this course of action for 4 Shabbases in a row after a month, then she loses her marriage payment and the husband can divorce her for free. With regard to this law, the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances in which the law of a rebellious woman applies? And the Maimar said, the cases where she says, I want to be married to him, but I am currently refusing him because I want to cause him anguish due to a dispute between us. However, if she said, I am disgusted with him, then we do not compel her to remain with him, as one should not be compelled to live with someone who disgusts her. And Mar Zutra said, we do compel her to stay with him. The law is that we don't, right? So if she somehow ends up in a marriage and she just is disgusted by her husband, that's enough. They're going to say, okay, this marriage doesn't work, give her the divorce. She might not be entitled to the marriage payment because of it. But if she's saying, I will not have sex with him because I'm so angry, I'm furious with him, well, then there's hope for this marriage, and they try to save the marriage. Now, it is related that there was an incident in which a woman rebelled, claiming that she was disgusted with her husband, and Mar Zutra compelled her to stay with him. And from this couple issued Rabbi Hanina of Surah. And this demonstrates that even such coercion can cause a blessing, sometimes. However, the Gemara concludes that is not so. That case should not serve as a precedent, as there the positive outcome was due to heavenly assistance. Ordinarily, nothing good results from conjugal relations that the wife does not desire. She's disgusted by the husband. We do not compel her to stay in that marriage. It is related that the daughter-in-law of Rav Zevid rebelled against her husband. She was holding a certain garment in her hands. A Maimar, Mar Zutra, and Rav Ashi were sitting, and Rav Gamda was sitting with them. And they sat and said, if a woman rebelled, she lost her right to her worn clothes, meaning she has forfeited the clothes that she brought with her for her dowry, even if they are still in existence. Rav Gamda said to them, because Rav Zevid is a great man, are you willing to flatter him with regard to this law? You're going to, right, because the daughter-in-law of Rav Zevid came, right? And so that is coming before them. So are you going to flatter Rav Zevid by giving her a positive ruling, which is not correct, which is not the law? It doesn't sound like they were flattering Rav Zevid. They're saying that if she's rebelling, she loses the right even to her worn clothes. Rav Gamda said to them, because Rav Zevid is a great man, are you willing to flatter him with regard to this law? Didn't Rav Kahana say that Rava raises a dilemma about this issue with regard to worn clothes? And he did not resolve it. Yet you reached a decision out of respect for Rav Zevid. This is inappropriate. There are those who say that this incident happened differently, as these 3 sages sat and said, if she rebelled, she did not lose her right to worn clothes. And Rav Gamda said to them, because Rav Zevid is a great man, and due to his piety and humility, he would not challenge the ruling, you twist the judgment against him. I'm confused. Why is it good for her if they say she loses the right to her clothing that she brought in with the dowry, and bad for her if they say that she doesn't? Maybe what they're saying is she's rebelling and okay, you lose the rights to the dowry and therefore you can have the divorce that you're seeking right away. And maybe that is how they're flattering Rav Zevid rather than forcing her to stay in the marriage, at least to try to work it out. Now that it was not, and I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. And now that it was not stated and concluded this way or that way, if she seized an item of her possessions, we do not take it away from her, but if she did not seize it, we do not give it to her. And the Gemara adds another halacha with regard to a rebellious woman, and we delay her bill of divorce for 12 months of the year, and do not give her a bill of divorce until then. And during those 12 months of the year, she does not receive sustenance from her husband. In other words, pressuring the couple to try and work it out, pressuring her not to be a rebellious woman who in her anger says, I will not, have conjugal relations with my husband, for an extended amount of time. They're trying to pressure her to stay in the marriage because that would be better. But, eventually if she sticks to her guns, she's going to get the divorce. Okay, let's go to questions or comments. On page 63. Wait, come on. Come on, Google, you sign me out. Here we go. Regarding the husband who comes home once a year on Yom Kippur. Aoife asks, are a married couple supposed to engage in marital relations on Yom Kippur? Absolutely not. What they're saying, marital relations are specifically prohibited on Yom Kippur. It says so in the Torah. But what they mean is that he would come home to spend this holiday at home. And so, he'd be home for a day or two before Yom Kippur and perhaps a day or two afterward. No Jews engage in marital relations on Yom Kippur. Regarding the conversation in the comments about if Akiva and Rachel were really apart for 24 years, Bill says, what is the rhythm of life for the study hall? Are there dormitories? Are the students cloistered? That sounds semi-monastic, which I was given to understand Judaism looked askance at. If the students are, however, coming and going from habitations elsewhere, what's all this about Rachel living like a widow? Was Akiva's study hall just particularly far away? I don't know where it was, but my sense is it was far away. There was definitely not commuter students. They were learning 20 hours a day, hardly ever sleeping, and it was a journey for him to come home. I don't think it was just going across town. Sharon says, Ray coming and going. If so, why did they say she was living like a widow? Ray living and hiding. That was when the Romans were looking to arrest him for teaching Torah. That was much later in his life. Exactly. Long after the fall of Jerusalem and the temple. But yeah, I think Sharon's got it right. I mean, we wouldn't call her living like a widow if he was able to come home from time to time. You're absolutely right, Bill. Judaism looks askance at monastic living. That is not correct, right? In fact, we have a teaching elsewhere in the Talmud that we will actually be held accountable when we reach heaven for not enjoying the permitted pleasures of this world. In other words, God gave us all kinds of gifts, various foods that are permitted to eat and to taste, beautiful places to visit, to be thankful to God for the glory of nature that he created. There's many kinds of pleasures that are permitted, and we should take advantage of them. We should not be living a monastic life. Elsewhere also, some Torah scholars spent all their lives learning Torah, but there were many who were also running a business, also having a rich family life. And even here in the case of Rabbi Akiva, it was really like to get him up to speed, as it were, as the greatest sage in Israel, that took those 24 years of learning. But thereafter, he lived at home, and he and his wife had a wonderful life at home. So definitely we looked at on a monastic life. I think it must be that he simply was far away, and the trip home and back would have required too many days away from his studies for him to, consider making that trip. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific.